The courthouse in downtown Phoenix was silent except for the rhythmic clicking of Bronwyn Lockhart's expensive heels against the marble floor. She swept into Courtroom 4B with the confidence of someone who had never lost anything important in her life. Her designer suit hugging her frame perfectly, her perfectly highlighted blonde hair catching the fluorescent lights overhead. Her lawyer, Gerald Hutchins, one of the most expensive attorneys in Arizona, walked beside her carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Bronwyn's lips curved into a satisfied smile as she took her seat at the plaintiff's table. Everything was going according to plan. Then the courtroom door opened again. Tahlia Brennan walked in alone. No lawyer, no briefcase full of legal documents, no expensive suit. Just a young woman in a simple black dress she'd probably bought at Target, carrying a single folder and a look of determination that did nothing to hide the fear in her eyes. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her hands trembled slightly as she made her way to the defendant's table. That's when Bronwyn started laughing. It wasn't a quiet chuckle. It was a full, throaty laugh that echoed through the courtroom like a victory bell. She leaned over to Gerald, not even bothering to lower her voice. "Are you seeing this? She's representing herself? Oh my God, this is going to be easier than I thought." Gerald shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between Bronwyn and the young woman across the aisle. "Mrs. Lockhart, perhaps we should..." "Should what? Be worried?" Bronwyn's laugh grew louder. "Look at her, Gerald. She can barely afford a decent outfit, let alone a lawyer. This is a defamation lawsuit. Does she even know what that word means?" Tahlia's face flushed red, but she kept her eyes down, organizing the few papers she had brought with her. Her hands were shaking more noticeably now. The bailiff called for everyone to rise as Judge Morrison entered, a stern-looking woman in her late 50s who had seen every kind of courtroom drama in her 20-year career. But even she seemed to pause when she noticed Tahlia sitting alone at the defendant's table. "Ms. Brennan," Judge Morrison said, her voice carrying a note of concern. "I see you're representing yourself today. Are you certain you don't want to request a continuance to secure legal counsel?" Tahlia stood, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, Your Honor. I'm ready to proceed." Bronwyn's smile widened into something predatory. This was going to be a massacre, and she was going to enjoy every second of it. But to understand how we got to this moment, to understand why Bronwyn Lockhart was so confident, and why Tahlia Brennan was standing alone in that courtroom, we need to go back 3 months earlier. Reese Lockhart had been the kind of man who looked good on paper. At 42, he was a successful commercial real estate developer in Phoenix, drove a Mercedes, lived in a sprawling house in Paradise Valley, and was married to Bronwyn, a former beauty queen who now spent her days attending charity luncheons and posting filtered photos on social media. They were the kind of couple people envied from the outside, the kind whose Christmas cards made everyone else feel inadequate about their own lives. But paper can hide a lot of stains. Reese had met Tahlia at a real estate conference in Scottsdale. She was 28, working 2 jobs to pay off her student loans, and had been hired as temporary administrative help for the event. She was smart, genuine, and had a laugh that made Reese remember what it felt like to talk to someone who actually listened. They started talking during a coffee break, then at lunch, then Reese found himself looking for excuses to walk past her desk just to see her smile. He told himself it was innocent, just conversation, just friendship. But the heart knows when you're lying to yourself. Their friendship grew over emails, then text messages, then coffee meetings that Reese didn't mention to Bronwyn. Tahlia knew he was married. She saw the ring on his finger. And for months she kept their relationship strictly platonic, even as her own feelings grew deeper. She never wanted to be the other woman. She had watched her own mother cry herself to sleep after her father's affair, and she had promised herself she would never cause that kind of pain to anyone. But Reese painted a picture of a marriage that was already dead. He told Tahlia about the separate bedrooms, the lack of conversation beyond logistics, the way Bronwyn looked at him like he was just another accessory in her perfectly curated life. He said he was going to leave. He said he just needed time to figure out the right way to do it. And Tahlia, who should have known better, who did know better, made the mistake of believing him. Their relationship turned physical on a rainy Tuesday evening in February. Reese had told Bronwyn he was meeting potential investors for dinner. Instead, he met Tahlia at a quiet restaurant on the outskirts of town, where the chances of running into anyone they knew were slim. The conversation over wine was easy, comfortable, like two puzzle pieces that had finally found each other. When he drove her back to her modest apartment, she invited him in. When he kissed her, she kissed him back. When morning came, they were tangled together in her sheets, and Reese was whispering promises about divorce lawyers and new beginnings. For 6 weeks, they existed in a bubble. Reese would make excuses to Bronwyn about late meetings, weekend property inspections, business trips to Tucson. He would spend those stolen hours with Tahlia, planning a future that felt more real than the present he was living. They talked about moving to Colorado, starting fresh, maybe buying a small property where Tahlia could finally write the novel she'd been dreaming about since college. Reese seemed lighter, younger, more alive than he had been in years. Tahlia knew it was wrong. The guilt ate at her every night. But Reese kept assuring her that his marriage was over in everything but paperwork, that Bronwyn wouldn't even care, that they were already living separate lives. He was wrong about that last part. Bronwyn cared very much, not because she loved Reese anymore, if she ever had, but because Bronwyn Lockhart did not lose. Not at tennis, not at social standing, and certainly not to some nobody who worked retail jobs to make ends meet. Bronwyn found out about the affair in the most mundane way possible, a text message notification that popped up on Reese's iPad while he was in the shower. The iPad was synced to his phone, and Bronwyn had been using it to check her own messages when Tahlia's name appeared, with a heart emoji, and the words, "I miss you, already? Last night was perfect." Bronwyn's blood turned to ice, then to fire. She didn't confront Reese immediately. That would have been messy, emotional, beneath her. Instead, she hired a private investigator, got photos, got proof, got everything she needed. Then she did something calculated and cruel, something that would haunt Tahlia for months to come. She called Tahlia's employers, both of them. Using a fake name, Bronwyn told the manager at the retail store where Tahlia worked that she had witnessed Tahlia stealing from the cash register. She provided specific dates and times, all fabricated. Then she called the office where Tahlia worked part-time and claimed she had seen Tahlia using company equipment for personal business and accessing confidential files. Both employers fired Tahlia within a week. Tahlia was devastated. She didn't understand what had happened. The accusations were false, but her employers hadn't given her a chance to defend herself. She was suddenly unemployed, behind on her rent, with student loan payments looming and no way to pay them. When she called Reese crying, begging him to help her understand what was going on, he finally confessed the truth. Bronwyn knew everything, and she was coming for both of them. But what Bronwyn did next wasn't just cruel. It was calculated to destroy Tahlia completely. She filed a defamation lawsuit claiming that Tahlia had been spreading rumors around Phoenix about Bronwyn being a gold digger who had trapped Reese into marriage. She claimed Tahlia had been posting lies on social media, telling people at networking events that Bronwyn was mentally unstable, ruining her reputation in their social circles. None of it was true. Tahlia had never spoken publicly about Bronwyn at all, but Bronwyn had money, influence, and Gerald Hutchins, who knew exactly how to craft a lawsuit that would be expensive and difficult to fight, even if it was baseless. Tahlia couldn't afford a lawyer. She had applied for legal aid, but the wait list was months long, and the lawsuit was moving forward quickly. Bronwyn was pushing for an expedited trial, knowing that every day Tahlia spent without legal representation was another day of advantage. So Tahlia made the only choice she had left. She would represent herself. She would stand in that courtroom alone and fight back the only way she knew how, with the truth. Which brought us back to that moment in Courtroom 4B, with Bronwyn laughing and Tahlia trembling and Judge Morrison looking between them with growing concern. "Mrs. Lockhart," the judge said sharply, "I'll remind you that this is a courtroom, not a social gathering. If you cannot contain yourself, I'll have you removed." Bronwyn pressed her lips together, but the smile never left her eyes. "My apologies, Your Honor." Judge Morrison turned her attention to the case file in front of her, but before she could speak, the courtroom door opened one more time. A man in a sheriff's uniform walked in, carrying a thick manila envelope. He scanned the room, then walked directly to the defendant's table and handed it to Tahlia. "Ms. Brennan, you've been served." Talia's hands shook as she opened the envelope. Her face went white as she read the first page. Bronwyn leaned over to Gerald. "What is that?" Gerald pulled out his phone, checking messages from his assistant. His face went pale. "Oh, no." "What?" Bronwyn demanded. "Mrs. Lockhart, did you know that Tahlia Brennan was 9 weeks pregnant when she lost both her jobs?" The color drained from Bronwyn's face. "What?" "And did you know," Gerald continued, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper, "that she miscarried 2 weeks ago due to stress?" Bronwyn's smile finally faltered. "How would I—" "Because," Gerald said, showing her his phone screen, "she's filing a countersuit against you for intentional infliction of emotional distress, tortious interference with employment, and—" He paused, his voice grim. "Wrongful death of her unborn child." The papers in Tahlia's hands weren't what Bronwyn thought. They were notification that her own countersuit had been formally filed and accepted by the court. Tahlia stood up, and when she spoke, her voice was no longer trembling. It was steady, clear, and filled with a quiet fury that made the entire courtroom go silent. "Your Honor," she said, "I may not have a fancy lawyer, but I do have the truth. And I have evidence, lots of it." She pulled a laptop from her bag, something Bronwyn hadn't noticed before. Then she pulled out a small recording device, then a stack of phone records, then screenshots of text messages that made Gerald's eyes widen in alarm. "Before we proceed with Mrs. Lockhart's baseless defamation claim," Tahlia continued, her eyes locked on Bronwyn, "I think the court should hear about how she systematically destroyed my life, cost me both my jobs with false accusations, and caused so much stress that—" Her voice broke for just a second, but she pushed through it. "That I lost my baby." Bronwyn's world tilted. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. This was supposed to be easy. A slam dunk. A poor, uneducated girl with no resources going up against money and power. But Tahlia wasn't done. She looked directly at Bronwyn, and for the first time, there was no fear in her eyes, only determination. "You laughed at me when I walked in here, Mrs. Lockhart. You thought I was pathetic, helpless, beaten." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "But you made one mistake. You assumed I wouldn't fight back." Judge Morrison leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. "Ms. Brennan, are you saying you have evidence that the plaintiff engaged in illegal activity against you?" "Yes, Your Honor, including recorded phone calls where she admitted to making false reports to my employers, including text messages to mutual acquaintances where she bragged about destroying the homewrecker, including proof that every single claim in her defamation lawsuit is fabricated." Gerald was frantically texting someone. Bronwyn's hands had started shaking. The courtroom had gone from feeling like her victory parade to feeling like a trap closing around her. "And there's more," Tahlia said quietly. "Things about Mrs. Lockhart that she definitely doesn't want becoming public record." Bronwyn's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" Tahlia smiled, and it wasn't friendly. It was the smile of someone who had been pushed too far and had finally decided to push back. "Should we tell them about the offshore accounts, Bronwyn? The ones under your maiden name that Reese doesn't know about? The ones you've been funneling money into for the past 5 years?" The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison's gavel cracked against the bench like a gunshot. "Order! I will have order in this courtroom." Bronwyn shot to her feet, her face flushed red. "That's a lie! Your Honor, she's making things up out of desperation." But Gerald had gone deathly quiet beside her, his eyes fixed on his phone screen where his assistant had just sent him something that made his expression turn grim. He tugged at Bronwyn's sleeve urgently. "We need to request a recess. Now." "No," Bronwyn hissed. "I'm not running from this nobody's ridiculous accusations." Tahlia remained standing, calm in a way that was more terrifying than any outburst. She opened her laptop and turned it toward the judge. "Your Honor, I have bank statements, transfer records, and emails, all legally obtained through discovery requests that I filed myself 3 weeks ago. Mrs. Lockhart thought I was too stupid to know how to do proper legal research." She paused, letting that sink in. "But I spent every night for the past month in the public library. I learned how to file motions. I learned how to submit discovery requests. I learned how to subpoena financial records. And what I found was fascinating." Judge Morrison gestured for the bailiff to bring her the laptop. As she scrolled through the documents, her eyebrows climbed higher and higher. "Mrs. Lockhart, these appear to show regular transfers of significant amounts from joint accounts you share with your husband into accounts bearing your maiden name, Kelleher, accounts located in the Cayman Islands." Bronwyn's lawyer finally found his voice. "Your Honor, my client's personal financial arrangements are not relevant to this defamation case." "Oh, but they are," Tahlia interjected. She was gaining confidence with every word, like someone who had been holding their breath underwater for too long and finally broke the surface. "Because Mrs. Lockhart's entire defamation claim rests on the assertion that I damaged her reputation by calling her a gold digger. But, Your Honor, the truth is an absolute defense to defamation. And the truth is, she is a gold digger. She's been systematically stealing from her husband for years, preparing for a divorce where she could claim she has no assets while hiding millions offshore." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Bronwyn looked like she'd been slapped. Her carefully constructed image, the one she'd spent years building, was crumbling in real time. "That's enough!" Bronwyn shouted. "You have no right to—" "I have every right," Tahlia cut her off, her voice rising for the first time. "You destroyed my life. You got me fired from both my jobs with lies. You caused so much stress that I lost my baby." Her voice cracked on that last word, raw emotion breaking through. "Did you know I was pregnant, Bronwyn? Did you know and do it anyway? Or did you just not care enough to find out?" Silence fell over the courtroom. Even Judge Morrison looked moved, her stern expression softening slightly as she looked at the young woman standing alone at the defendant's table. Bronwyn's mouth opened and closed. For once in her life, she had no response. Gerald stood up quickly. "Your Honor, I request a 30-minute recess to consult with my client." "Denied," Judge Morrison said sharply. "We're going to get to the bottom of this right now. Ms. Brennan, you mentioned recorded phone calls. I want to hear them." Tahlia nodded and pressed a button on her recording device. A woman's voice filled the courtroom, crystal clear and unmistakable. "Yes, I want to report an employee stealing from the cash register. Her name is Tahlia Brennan." It was Bronwyn's voice, though she'd tried to disguise it slightly. But the subtle Arizona accent was there, the particular way she pronounced certain words. "That's not me," Bronwyn protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Tahlia played another recording. This time, Bronwyn was talking to someone else, someone who sounded like a friend. "I'm going to destroy her, Peyton. By the time I'm done, she won't be able to get a job at a car wash. That little homewrecker thought she could steal my husband? Please, I'm going to ruin her life." The friend's voice responded, "Bron, don't you think that's a bit extreme? I mean, Reese is the one who—" "I don't care." Bronwyn's voice was sharp, venomous. "He's a man. He's stupid." But her? She knew what she was doing. She needs to learn that there are consequences. Judge Morrison's face had gone cold. "Mrs. Lockhart, that certainly sounds like you admitting to making false reports to Ms. Brennan's employers." Gerald was typing frantically on his phone, probably messaging his malpractice insurance carrier. "Your Honor, I'd like to withdraw as counsel for the plaintiff." "Absolutely not," Judge Morrison said. "You're staying right where you are until I sort this out. Ms. Brennan, what else do you have?" Tahlia took a deep breath. This was the part she'd been dreading, not because she didn't have the evidence, but because it would expose everything, including her own mistakes, including the affair. "Your Honor, Mrs. Lockhart's defamation suit claims I spread rumors about her, but the truth is, I barely spoke about her at all. I was too busy being ashamed of myself for getting involved with her husband. I knew it was wrong. I knew it every single day. But Reese told me their marriage was over, that they were separated in every way but legally, and I believed him." Her voice grew quieter, more vulnerable. "I'm not proud of what I did. I'm not standing here claiming to be innocent in the affair. But what happened between me and Reese was between 3 adults who made bad choices. What Bronwyn did was different. She didn't just go after me emotionally. She systematically destroyed my ability to support myself. She called my employers with lies. She threatened my landlord, telling him I was dealing drugs from my apartment, which led to an eviction notice. She called my student loan company claiming I had died, which triggered a default process. She tried to get my car repossessed by reporting it stolen. With each revelation, Bronwyn seemed to shrink in her chair. The powerful, confident woman who had walked in laughing now looked small and trapped. "How do you know I did any of that?" Bronwyn finally said, but her voice was weak. Tahlia pulled out her phone and held it up. "Because you were so confident you'd win, so sure I was too poor and stupid to fight back, that you told your friend Peyton everything. Every single thing you did to me, and Peyton recorded your conversations." The courtroom went silent. "You see," Tahlia continued, "Peyton felt guilty. She didn't agree with what you were doing, but she was scared to confront you directly, so she started recording your calls. And 2 weeks ago, after I lost the baby, she contacted me. She gave me everything, every recording, every text message where you bragged about destroying me." Bronwyn's face had gone from red to white. "Peyton wouldn't—" "She did," Tahlia said simply. "She's outside right now, actually, ready to testify if needed." Judge Morrison sat back in her chair, processing everything she'd heard. "This is highly irregular. Mrs. Lockhart, I'm inclined to dismiss your defamation claim with prejudice and allow Ms. Brennan's countersuit to proceed. However, before I make that ruling, is there anything you'd like to say in your defense?" Bronwyn looked at Gerald, who just shook his head slightly. She was on her own. Bronwyn started, then stopped. For the first time in years, maybe in her entire life, she had no script to follow, no way to spin the situation in her favor. "She slept with my husband?" It came out like a child's excuse, weak and desperate. "Yes, she did," Judge Morrison said, not unkindly. "And that was wrong. But you committed multiple crimes in response, Mrs. Lockhart, making false reports to employers, filing a frivolous lawsuit, possibly fraud regarding the offshore accounts. What Ms. Brennan did was morally questionable. What you did was illegal." Bronwyn's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of rage and humiliation. "You don't understand. I gave him the best years of my life. I made him look good. I made him successful. And he threw it all away for some retail worker with student loans." "That retail worker," Tahlia said quietly, "was pregnant with his child. A child I wanted. A child I lost because you couldn't handle the fact that your husband didn't love you anymore." "He never loved you either," Bronwyn spat. "You were just convenient. Younger. You think he was going to actually leave me for you? You think he was going to give up his house, his lifestyle, his social standing for someone who shops at Target?" "Maybe not," Tahlia admitted, and there was a sadness in her voice that was heartbreaking. "But I loved him. Really loved him. Not his money, not his status, him. And maybe that was stupid and naive, but it was real. Can you say the same thing, Bronwyn? Did you ever actually love Reese? Or did you just love what he could give you?" Before Bronwyn could answer, the courtroom door burst open. Reese Lockhart stood in the doorway, his suit rumpled, his face flushed like he'd been running. Behind him were two men in dark suits carrying briefcases. "Sorry I'm late, Your Honor," he said, breathing hard. "I'm Reese Lockhart, and I need to tell the court something important about my wife's offshore accounts." Bronwyn's face went from white to gray. "Reese, don't—" "Those accounts you found, Tahlia?" Reese interrupted, walking toward the front of the courtroom. "They don't just have Bronwyn's money in them. They have money she embezzled from my company, over $3 million over the past 5 years." The courtroom exploded again. Gerald looked like he might pass out. Bronwyn lunged toward Reese, but the bailiff stepped between them. "You bastard!" she screamed. "You're supposed to be on my side." "You destroyed an innocent woman's life," Reese said, and his voice was shaking with emotion. "You made her lose our baby, my baby, a child I didn't even know existed until yesterday when Tahlia's friend contacted me. How could you do that, Bron? How could you be that cruel?" Tahlia was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face as she watched the man she'd loved defend her in front of everyone. "Judge," Morrison banged her gavel repeatedly. "Mr. Lockhart, are you saying you want to file charges against your wife?" "Yes, Your Honor," Reese said. "The two men behind me are FBI agents. We've been investigating Bronwyn's accounts for the past 2 weeks, ever since my accountant noticed irregularities. We were waiting for the right moment to make an arrest." One of the agents stepped forward, pulling out handcuffs. "Bronwyn Kelleher Lockhart, you're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and—" But before he could finish, Bronwyn did something no one expected. She pulled a small pistol from her purse. Time seemed to slow down. The bailiff reached for his own weapon. The FBI agents moved forward with trained precision. Reese stepped back, his hands raised. But Bronwyn wasn't pointing the gun at any of them. She was pointing it at Tahlia. "You," Bronwyn said, her voice trembling with rage and desperation. "This is all your fault. Everything was fine until you came along with your innocent act and your stupid dreams. You ruined everything." Tahlia stood frozen, staring down the barrel of the gun. In that moment, all the courtroom drama, all the legal maneuvering, all the clever evidence she'd gathered meant nothing. She was facing death, and the only thing she could think about was the baby she'd lost. At least she'd see her child again soon. "Mrs. Lockhart, put the weapon down," the bailiff commanded, his own gun now trained on Bronwyn. "There's no way out of this that ends well for you if you pull that trigger." "Ends well for me?" Bronwyn laughed, a high, hysterical sound. "Nothing ends well for me anymore, don't you understand? I lose everything. My husband, my money, my reputation, my freedom. So why should she get to walk away? Why does the homewrecker get to stand there playing the victim when she destroyed my marriage?" "I didn't destroy your marriage," Tahlia said softly, finding her voice despite the terror coursing through her. "Your marriage was already dead, Bronwyn. Maybe it was never really alive at all. "Shut up!" Bronwyn screamed, her finger tightening on the trigger. "Bron, please," Rhys said, his voice breaking. "Don't do this. Haven't you done enough?" "Enough?" Bronwyn's laugh turned into a sob. "I haven't done enough. I should have done more. I should have destroyed her completely the moment I found out. But I played it smart. I was careful. I tried to ruin her legally, socially, financially. I wanted her to suffer slowly. But you know what? I should have just done this from the beginning." Judge Morrison's voice cut through the chaos, calm and authoritative. "Bronwyn, I know you're hurting. I know you feel betrayed and humiliated. But killing this young woman won't change anything. It won't bring your marriage back. It won't erase what happened. It will just make you a murderer." "I'm already going to prison," Bronwyn shouted. "Embezzlement, fraud, false reports. I heard the charges. My life is over anyway. At least this way. She doesn't get a happy ending either." "Happy ending?" Tahlia's voice was stronger now, anger mixing with her fear. "You think I get a happy ending? I lost my baby, Bronwyn. I lost both my jobs. I lost my apartment. I lost my dignity. I've spent the past 3 months living in my car, eating once a day if I'm lucky, spending every night in the public library trying to figure out how to defend myself against your lawsuit because I couldn't afford an attorney. I've thought about ending my own life at least a dozen times because the pain was too much to bear." Her voice cracked, tears streaming down her face. "I lost everything that mattered to me, including the child I wanted more than anything in this world, so please, please don't stand there and talk about happy endings like I'm walking away from this unscathed. You already destroyed me. The only difference is I'm still breathing." Something in Bronwyn's expression shifted. For just a moment, the rage flickered, and something else showed through. Something that might have been recognition or shame, or the faint echo of humanity she'd buried under years of vanity and entitlement. But then her jaw tightened, and she steadied the gun. "You're right. You should have stayed destroyed." The gunshot echoed through the courtroom like thunder. But Bronwyn wasn't the one who fired. The bailiff's bullet caught her in the shoulder, spinning her around and sending her gun clattering across the floor. She fell hard against the plaintiff's table, screaming in pain. The FBI agents rushed forward, securing both her and the weapon. One of them was already calling for an ambulance on his radio. Tahlia collapsed into her chair, her whole body shaking uncontrollably. Rhys tried to move toward her, but one of the agents held him back while they secured the scene. Judge Morrison stood, her face pale but composed. "This court is in recess. Everyone except essential personnel, please exit through the rear doors in an orderly fashion. Miss Brennan, are you injured?" Tahlia shook her head, unable to speak. She wasn't injured physically, but something inside her had broken in a different way. The reality of how close she'd come to dying was hitting her in waves. Gerald had already fled the courtroom, probably to call his insurance company and his own lawyer. Several spectators who had been in the gallery were being ushered out by security. Bronwyn was being restrained by the FBI agents, still screaming through her pain about how unfair it all was. An EMT rushed in and knelt beside Tahlia. "Ma'am, I need you to look at me. Can you do that? Look right at me." Tahlia forced her eyes to focus on the young woman's face. The EMT was checking her pupils, her pulse, asking questions about her breathing. "Shock," she was saying. "Possible panic attack. We need to get her stable." Across the room, Bronwyn was being loaded onto a stretcher, handcuffed to the rail despite her wounded shoulder. As they wheeled her past, she locked eyes with Tahlia one last time. "I hope you're happy," Bronwyn hissed. "I hope it was all worth it." Tahlia found her voice, hoarse but clear. "I'm not happy. I don't think I'll ever be happy again. But at least I have the truth. And at least I fought back." Bronwyn closed her eyes as they wheeled her away, and for the first time, she looked old. not physically but spiritually exhausted, like someone who had finally reached the end of a very long, very bitter road. 3 hours later, Tahlia sat in a small conference room in the courthouse, wrapped in a blanket someone had given her despite the Phoenix heat. Judge Morrison had called for an emergency hearing to resolve the legal matters before them. "Ms. Brennan," the judge said gently, "I'm dismissing Mrs. Lockhart's defamation suit with prejudice. Furthermore, based on the evidence presented today and Mrs. Lockhart's own admissions, I'm ruling in favor of your countersuit. I'm awarding you damages in the amount of $500,000 for intentional infliction of emotional distress, tortious interference with employment, and the pain and suffering you've endured." Tahlia nodded numbly. $500,000. It should have felt like victory. It should have felt like justice. But all she felt was empty. "Additionally," Judge Morrison continued, "Mr. Lockhart has informed me that he wishes to speak with you, if you're willing. He's waiting outside. But you are under no obligation to see him if you don't want to." Tahlia thought about it for a long moment. Part of her wanted to refuse, wanted to walk away from Reese and everything connected to this nightmare. But another part of her needed closure, needed to hear what he had to say. "I'll see him," she said quietly, "but just for a few minutes." Reese entered the room looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past few hours. His eyes were red-rimmed, his shoulders slumped. He sat down across from Tahlia, but didn't try to touch her or get too close. "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice was barely above a whisper. "Those words aren't enough. They'll never be enough. But I need you to know that I'm sorry for all of it. For lying to you about my marriage. For not protecting you from Bronwyn. For not being there when you needed me most. For not knowing about the baby until it was too late." Tahlia stared at her hands. "Did you love me? Even a little bit? Or was I really just convenient, like Bronwyn said?" Reese was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I loved you. I did. But I also loved the idea of you. Someone who made me feel young and important and interesting again. I loved the escape you represented. And that wasn't fair to you. You deserved someone who loved you for the right reasons, not someone running away from a broken marriage." "The baby was a boy," Tahlia said suddenly. "I found out 2 days before I lost him. I was going to name him Owen." Reese's face crumpled. "Owen," he repeated, his voice breaking. That's a good name. Orchestrated emotional closure for character arc conclusion. I need to bring this to a meaningful conclusion. The user wants the story to end at Chapter 3, and I need to wrap up the emotional threads while providing closure for Tahlia's character arc. This should be bittersweet, realistic, and emotionally resonant. "I need you to understand something, Reese," Tahlia said, looking at him directly. "What we had was never going to work. Even if Bronwyn hadn't found out, even if everything had been perfect, we were built on a foundation of lies and guilt. I convinced myself that love could overcome that, but I was wrong. Love isn't enough when it starts in the wrong place." "I know," Reese said, "and I take full responsibility for my part in this. I'm the one who pursued you. I'm the one who made promises I couldn't keep. I'm the one who put you in Bronwyn's crosshairs." "You're also the one who brought the FBI to that courtroom today," Tahlia pointed out. "You could have stayed silent about the embezzlement. You could have protected her." "After what she did to you? After what she caused?" Reese shook his head firmly. "No. Some lines you don't come back from. When my accountant found the discrepancies, and I realized Bronwyn had been stealing from my company for years, I was angry. But when I found out about the baby, when Peyton called me and told me everything Bronwyn had done to you, everything she'd caused..." He stopped, composing himself. "That's when I knew I had to make it right, or at least try to." "Making it right would be bringing Owen back," Tahlia said, her voice breaking. Making it right would be giving me back the past 3 months of my life. Making it right would be erasing the fact that I'll probably never trust myself or anyone else ever again. You're right, Reese said. I can't make it right, but I can try to help you move forward. The FBI seized most of Bronwyn's offshore accounts. Once everything is settled legally, that money will be returned to my company. I've already instructed my lawyers to set up a trust in your name with $2 million. It's not about buying forgiveness or salving my conscience. It's about making sure you never have to worry about money again while you put your life back together. Tahlia shook her head. I don't want your money. It's not a gift, Reese insisted. It's restitution. Owen was my son too, even though I never got to meet him. Even though I didn't know he existed until it was too late. This is the only way I know how to honor his memory and help his mother heal. Tahlia was crying again, silent tears that seemed to come from somewhere deep and endless inside her. Nothing will help me heal, Reese. Nothing will bring my baby back. No, he agreed softly, but time might help. Distance might help. Having the resources to get therapy, to move somewhere new, to start fresh without the burden of debt and poverty, that might help. Please, let me do this one thing right. After a long silence, Tahlia nodded. Not because she wanted his money, but because she was too tired to fight anymore, too emotionally drained to argue. And maybe, somewhere deep down, because she knew he was right. The money wouldn't heal her grief, but it would remove the practical barriers that had been crushing her along with the emotional ones. 6 months later, Tahlia stood in a small art gallery in Santa Fe, New Mexico, surrounded by photographs she'd taken during her healing journey. They were raw, emotional images, abandoned buildings representing lost dreams, flowers growing through cracked concrete symbolizing resilience, empty playgrounds that spoke to the child she'd lost. The gallery owner, a kind woman named Simone, had discovered Tahlia's work online and offered her a show. It wasn't a huge gallery, and the opening wasn't packed, but there were people there. Real people, looking at her work, connecting with her pain and her strength. Tahlia had used part of the settlement money and Reese's trust to move to New Mexico, to get an apartment with a spare room she'd turned into a dark room, to buy camera equipment, and enroll in therapy twice a week. She'd spent months working through her trauma, her grief, her guilt over the affair, and her anger at how everything had fallen apart. She would never be the same person she was before. That innocent, hopeful young woman who believed in fairy tales was gone. But maybe that was okay. Maybe she was becoming someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who understood that happy endings weren't guaranteed, and that survival itself was sometimes the victory. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Peyton, Bronwyn's former friend who had provided all the evidence that helped Tahlia win her case. Saw the gallery announcement online. So proud of you. You're an inspiration. Tahlia smiled slightly. She didn't feel like an inspiration. She felt like someone who had barely survived a hurricane and was still picking up the pieces. But maybe that was what inspiration actually looked like. Not perfect people doing perfect things, but broken people choosing to keep going anyway. Another text came through, this one from an unknown number. She almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. Ms. Brennan, this is Judge Morrison. I hope you don't mind that I tracked down your number through the court system. I wanted you to know that I've been following your journey, and I'm proud of how far you've come. You represented yourself with dignity and courage in impossible circumstances. You should be very proud. Also, I thought you'd want to know. Bronwyn Lockhart was sentenced today. 7 years for embezzlement and fraud, plus additional charges related to the false reports and the courthouse incident. Justice was served. Best wishes for your continued healing. Tahlia stared at the message for a long time. 7 years. It should have felt like enough. It should have felt like closure. But the truth was, no sentence could give her back what she'd lost. No amount of jail time could return Owen to her arms or erase the trauma of that day in the courtroom when she'd stared down the barrel of a gun. But it was something. It was acknowledgement that what had been done to her was wrong. It was the system, flawed as it was, trying to make things right. She typed a response to Judge Morrison. "Thank you for letting me know. And thank you for believing me that day, for giving me a chance when I walked in alone. It meant more than you know." As the gallery opening continued around her, Tahlia thought about Bronwyn sitting in a prison cell, probably still angry, still bitter, still convinced she was the victim. She thought about Reese, who had sent her a few messages over the past months. Always respectful, never pushing, just checking in to make sure she was okay. She'd responded politely, but distantly. That chapter of her life was closed. Most of all, she thought about Owen, the baby boy she'd never gotten to meet. She'd created a small memorial in her apartment, a photograph of an ultrasound she'd had at 8 weeks, a tiny pair of baby shoes she'd bought in a moment of hopeful preparation, a journal where she wrote letters to the son she'd never raise. "I'm surviving," she whispered to Owen's memory. "I'm fighting, I'm healing, and someday, I hope I'll be happy again. Not the naive happiness I had before, but something deeper, something earned through pain and resilience." A woman approached her, someone Tahlia didn't recognize. "Excuse me, are you the artist?" Tahlia nodded. "Yes, I am." "These photographs are incredible," the woman said, her eyes glistening with emotion. "So raw and honest. I went through something similar, not the exact same situation, but I lost a child too, and then had to fight a legal battle while grieving. Your work makes me feel seen, like I'm not alone." And in that moment, Tahlia understood why she'd survived, why she'd fought back instead of giving up, why she'd dragged herself through those endless nights in the library, learning law she never wanted to know, preparing for a court battle that nearly killed her. It wasn't just for herself. It was for every other person who had been knocked down and told they were too weak, too poor, too uneducated to fight back. It was for every woman who had lost something precious and been expected to suffer in silence. It was for everyone who had ever stood alone against someone with more money, more power, more resources. "Thank you," Tahlia said to the woman, squeezing her hand gently. "Thank you for being here, and for sharing your story with me. We're survivors, both of us." As the evening wore on, Tahlia sold 3 photographs. It wasn't a fortune, but it was validation that her pain could become something meaningful, that her suffering could be transformed into art that helped others feel less alone. When the gallery finally closed and she walked out, into the cool New Mexico night, Tahlia looked up at the stars. Somewhere in that vast universe, she believed Owen existed in some form. A soul that had briefly touched Earth and left an imprint on her heart that would last forever. "I did it, baby," she whispered to the sky. "Your mama stood up and fought back. Your mama didn't let them break her completely. I'm not the same person I was, and I'll carry this grief forever. But I'm still here, still standing, still fighting." The wind picked up, gentle and warm despite the late hour, and Tahlia chose to believe it was Owen's way of saying he was proud of her, that he understood, that somehow, in the midst of all the pain and darkness, something meaningful had emerged. She thought about Bronwyn's laughter that day in court, how confident she'd been that Tahlia would be crushed. But Bronwyn had made a critical mistake. She'd assumed that poverty meant powerlessness. That lack of education meant lack of intelligence. That being alone meant being weak. But Tahlia had proven her wrong. She'd walked into that courtroom alone, terrified, with nothing but a folder of evidence and a determination to tell the truth. And she'd walked out victorious, not because she'd destroyed Bronwyn, but because she'd refused to let Bronwyn destroy her. That was the real story. Not revenge, not punishment, but survival. Resilience. The quiet, unglamorous courage of someone who kept getting up every time they were knocked down. As Tahlia drove back to her small apartment, she thought about the future. Maybe someday she'd fall in love again, this time with someone who was truly available, truly honest. Maybe someday she'd have another child and honor Owen's memory by being the best mother she could be. Maybe someday the grief would soften into something bearable, a scar instead of an open wound. Or maybe not. Maybe she'd spend the rest of her life alone, pouring her heart into her photography, helping other survivors find their voices. And that would be okay too, because she'd learned the most important lesson of all. Happiness wasn't something someone else could give you or take away. It was something you built for yourself, piece by careful piece, even when everything around you was falling apart. Bronwyn's laughter had echoed through that courtroom 6 months ago, confident and cruel. But in the end, her smile hadn't lasted long at all, because the woman she'd tried to destroy had refused to stay broken. And that made all the difference.